Hello and welcome to another edition of Another Book Review. This week I'll be reviewing K. Chess's debut sci-fi novel, Famous Men Who Never Lived. Unfortunately, I don't have a cover share with you this week because I did listen to this on audiobook. I'll give you a brief rundown of the author, go over the plot without spoiling anything, give you what I liked about the book, what I didn't like about the book, who I'd recommend the book to, and finish off with what I will be reading for next time. K. Chess is a relatively new author. She published this book in 2019. She's also received some notoriety or awards for some of her short fiction work. She's also a teacher at, I believe, a website called Grub Street. But this was shortlisted in one of the books to look out for in 2019. I think it's been kind of slowly building in people's awareness for the last couple of years. So it is an interesting setup, and it's kind of convoluted, but I'll try my best to describe it. So in kind of our contemporary world, the idea of the story is in kind of contemporary America, sometime between 2008 and 2016, portals open up, and these portals, and out walks roughly 150,000 people into modern-day New York. And these 150,000 people are from another parallel universe. Think of Sliders, if you remember that show. And they come from a world that is being bombarded by nuclear weapons. They're Americans, but they're from this other timeline. And in this world, the world they're coming from, roughly the last 100 years of history are very different from our history. And so they've come to our world. They don't have a chance to go back to their world. And the book is really the story mostly of two main characters, Helen and Vikram, who are both one of these 150,000 people. They've come to our world, and they are in the process of just, surviving day to day, but also Helen is trying to start a museum with some of the artifacts that this group of 150,000 brought with them in order to kind of spread cultural awareness of this group. Vikram is working as a security guard, and he also notices that there's some strange going-ons at the, I think it's a factory of some sort that he is the guard for. And so that's really the plot. The plot is not so much the point of the book. It's really kind of the setup and this idea of the immigrant experience and what happens to people and what the toll takes on them, and the idea of assimilation versus not assimilating. And I think those are the best parts of the book. I think really when it's these two characters and their different looks at the world is when the book is at its best. I think it's also a really fascinating idea, a kernel for a book, of just how would the world be different if these 150,000 people just suddenly showed up who had a completely different 20th century than the rest of us did. And I think that was all really interesting. I think the book is maybe a little heavy-handed with some of the comparisons of immigrants to our world. I think that some of the ideas that she has don't really make a whole ton of sense to me. Some of the plot mechanisms don't really work. I think the plot is really maybe the thinnest part of the book. And I think with a stronger plot, and I think the book ultimately feels to me like someone who inherits a toy shop and then just doesn't play with any of the toys in the toy shop. I should say builds a toy shop, because she did build the toy shop. So I think there's the idea itself, I think the kernel of the idea is really interesting. It felt really underdeveloped with some of the other stuff. There's a little bit here and there about people, this 150,000, trying to become musicians and recording songs that they themselves know from their old world, but no one knows here, and the songs don't really play at all. But there's really not much more than that. I think she tries to sprinkle in some things with interstitial chapters of interviews of people who are in this 150,000. For one example, there's a guy who has a swastika tattoo, but in his world, the home world, the world he comes from, the swastika is still a symbol of good luck, and so he's ostracized because he has a swastika. This group is already ostracized already, and there's a question of, well, how realistic would that be in New York City? There's other things, too, where you kind of look askew because you're like, I don't know if people would actually really react to this group that way, especially in a city that's really kind of world famous for being tolerant of different cultures and peoples and immigrant status and legal status and all that stuff. So I thought that was a little confusing. I think that it also breaks of a book called The Pyronauts, which is kind of central to the plot. which is a book that Vikram, who was a graduate student in the home world, brought with him to this world, and it's kind of a seminal science fiction work in the home world, even though in this world the author never went on to write this book. And so I wish there had just been more stuff like that was really a look at what would happen with some of these cultural artifacts and how would that play in our world. And that, for more or less, is kind of dismissed in favor of just this group being kind of questionable status and everybody being kind of giving them the cold shoulder, which, again, I don't know if that would actually happen. The timeline is really kind of interesting because it's been 100 years, but also it's been in the timeline of this book, it's been 3 years since this portal opened, so this is really 3 years after these people came through. And I don't know. I just thought the execution was not as strong as it could have been. I was the plot especially left me felt a little lackluster, and it kind of wraps everything up, but in a way doesn't really make a lot of sense. And I think that there's other parts of it that don't make a ton of sense if you look at it with any scrutiny. I do think it's really at its best when it's really about these two characters. Part of me wishes she had just written a non-science fiction book, and kind of had done away with some of the science fiction trappings and just had a story of these two characters in this world as immigrants trying to have a struggle of, one person wants to assimilate and another person is less likely to assimilate for reasons that make sense, but are also, you're kind of moving at two different speeds, and what happens to this couple because of that. I think you can do that. I think Jeffrey Eugenides writes in Middlesex really, I thought, powerfully about the immigrant experience. And so comparing something like that to this, I wish she had maybe gone into more of that direction and maybe made this more of a literary book and less of a science fiction. Because I think with the sci-fi trappings, some expectations come along with that I don't think she's able to really deliver on. So I would say if you're someone who likes the idea of exploring loss and trauma connected to the immigrant experience and what it means to be an immigrant and what that does to someone's psyche of being kind of out of place and out of time, you may enjoy this book. I think maybe if I was doing a course on immigrant literature, this would not be the worst book to start with, because I think it is slim enough to kind of have that there, have other things surrounding it, but not make it so... I'll be honest with you, I felt it was kind of hit you over the head with it at times, but I'd still put it in that context if you just needed to do something different than the standard book, as it were. So that is Kay Chess's Famous Men Who Never Lived. And next time I'm going to be reading The Debt Trap by Josh Mitchell. So next time, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and if you haven't already, check me out on Twitter. I'll leave my Twitter link below if you'd like to follow me there. So until next time, bye.